The smoke billowed across the horizon like a black snake, coiling through the clear Montana sky as the derailed locomotive lay in twisted ruins along the tracks. Nathaniel Foster had seen his fair share of disasters in his 28 years, but something about this one sent him galloping toward the wreckage faster than he'd ever pushed his Mustang before. It was May 1878, and the Northern Pacific Railway's expansion had brought both progress and peril to the rugged territory. The screams reached him first panicked, pained cries cutting through the crackle of flames and hissing steam. Nathaniel dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to a nearby tree before plunging toward the chaos. Passengers stumbled away from the wreckage, faces smudged with soot and eyes wide with shock. That's when he heard a softer sound amid the cacophony. Weeping. Following the sound, he pushed through a cloud of smoke and spotted her. She was half hidden beneath a fallen piece of the train's wooden siding, tears cutting clean tracks through the ash on her face. Her blue dress was torn and singed, and her blonde hair had come loose from what must have been a careful arrangement. She couldn't have been older than 25. "Miss," Nathaniel called, crouching beside her. "Can you move?" Her eyes, startlingly green even through her tears, fixed on him. "My leg," she managed between sobs. "I think it's broken." Nathaniel assessed the situation quickly. The piece of debris trapping her wasn't crushing her, but she wouldn't be able to pull herself out without help. Flames were spreading from the engine, and they didn't have much time. "I'm going to lift this off you," he explained, his voice steady despite the urgency. "Then I'll carry you out. It's going to hurt, but we need to move fast." She nodded, gritting her teeth as he positioned himself. With one powerful heave, Nathaniel lifted the wooden panel and flung it aside. In one smooth motion, he scooped her into his arms, careful of her injured leg. "I've got you," he murmured as she cried out in pain. "Hold tight." She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder as he carried her away from the wreckage. The heat of the flames faded as he put distance between them and the train, finally reaching the spot where his horse waited. "My name's Nathaniel Foster," he said once they were safely away. "Most folks call me Nate." "Nora," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Nora Zimmerman." "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Foster." "Where were you headed, Miss Zimmerman?" he asked, carefully setting her down on a patch of grass. "Silverton," she replied, wincing as she tried to adjust her position. "I was going to stay with my cousin." "I've lost everything in the wreck, my luggage, my money." Nate studied her for a moment. He'd been heading back to his ranch outside of Silverton after delivering cattle to the railhead. He couldn't leave this woman stranded with a broken leg and no resources. "Well, Miss Zimmerman, it seems we're headed the same way. My ranch is about a day's ride from Silverton. I can take you there to recover, then escort you to your cousin's once you're mended." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by wariness. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Nate interrupted. "And with that leg, you don't have many options. I promise you'll be safe. My housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, will be there to maintain propriety." The mention of the housekeeper seemed to ease her concern. After a moment's hesitation, Nora nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Foster. First things first," he said, removing his bandana. "Let me make a splint for that leg and then we'll get moving." Using branches and his bandana, Nate fashioned a crude but effective splint. Nora bit her lip to keep from crying out as he worked, impressing him with her fortitude. "You're doing fine," he encouraged her. "Now I'm going to help you onto my horse and then I'll climb up behind you. It won't be comfortable, but it'll get us where we need to go." Getting Nora mounted was a painful process, but soon they were moving at a gentle pace. Nate kept one arm securely around her waist as she leaned back against his chest. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they finally stopped to rest. "How much farther?" Nora asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "We'll make camp soon," Nate replied. "We can reach the ranch by midday tomorrow if we start at first light." He helped her down and settled her against the trunk of a ponderosa pine before seeing to his horse. When he returned, Nora was staring at the darkening sky, her face drawn with pain. I have something that might help with the pain, he offered, pulling a small flask from his saddlebag. Whiskey? She asked with a weak smile. The best medicine in these parts, Nate confirmed, passing her the flask. Nora took a small sip, grimacing at the burn. I should tell you about myself, Mr. Foster. I was a schoolteacher in St. Paul. After my father died last winter, there was nothing keeping me there. My cousin Martha wrote that Silverton needed a teacher. Sounds like you're a brave woman, Miss Zimmerman, traveling all this way on your own. She handed the flask back to him, not brave, just desperate for a fresh start. As Nate built a small fire and prepared a simple meal from his provisions, he found himself watching Nora more than was proper. Despite her disheveled appearance and obvious pain, there was something captivating about her, a quiet strength and intelligence that shone through. What about you, Mr. Foster? She asked as they ate. Have you always been a rancher? Not always, he admitted. I came west after the war, fought for the Union, then couldn't settle back into normal life in Pennsylvania. Worked as a scout for a while, saved up enough to buy my spread 5 years ago. Family, none to speak of. Parents gone, no siblings. The ranch is my life now. They fell into comfortable silence as the fire crackled between them. When Nora's eyelids began to droop, Nate spread out his bedroll for her and offered his coat as an extra layer against the night chill. You're too kind, she murmured as he helped her lie down. Just doing what any decent man would, he replied, though he knew that wasn't entirely true. Something about Nora Zimmerman had gotten under his skin in the few hours he'd known her. Nate slept lightly, waking often to check on his charge. By morning, Nora's leg had swollen considerably and fever flushed her cheeks. We need to get you to the ranch faster than I thought, he said after examining her leg. The splint isn't enough. The journey that day was arduous. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, her body burning with fever. Nate pushed his horse harder than was wise, driven by growing concern. When the ranch finally came into view, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, barn, and bunkhouse relief washed over him. Mrs. Holloway, he called as he rode into the yard, Nora cradled against him. Mrs. Holloway, I need help. The housekeeper, a stout woman in her 50s, rushed from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Nora. Mercy, Mr. Foster, what have you gotten yourself into now? Train derailment, he explained quickly, dismounting while somehow maintaining his hold on Nora. Her leg's broken and she's fevered. Can you prepare the guest room? Mrs. Holloway sprang into action, ordering the ranch hands who had gathered to fetch water, clean linens, and the doctor from town. Within minutes, Nora was settled in the guest bedroom, and Mrs. Holloway was cutting away the tattered remains of her dress to better assess her injuries. You wait outside, Mr. Foster, the housekeeper ordered. This isn't proper for you to see. Nate reluctantly left the room, pacing the hallway until Dr. Maxwell arrived. The doctor spent nearly an hour with Nora before emerging, his expression serious but not grave. Clean break, he reported. I've said it, but she'll be off her feet for at least 6 weeks. The fever's from exhaustion and shock, not infection, which is fortunate. Keep her comfortable and I'll return in a few days to check on her. Nate thanked the doctor, a strange relief flooding through him. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Nora Zimmerman under his roof. The thought stirred something in him he couldn't quite name. For 3 days, Nora drifted between consciousness and fever dreams. Mrs. Holloway tended to her physical needs, but Nate found himself spending hours by her bedside, reading aloud from books he thought might interest a schoolteacher or simply sitting in silent vigil. On the 4th morning, he entered her room with a breakfast tray to find her fully awake, her green eyes clear for the first time since the accident. Mr. Foster, she said, her voice stronger than he expected. I believe I owe you my life several times over now. You don't owe me anything, he replied, setting the tray on the bedside table. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, she admitted with a small smile. But better than yesterday. That's progress. He helped her sit up against the pillows, acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation despite Mrs. Holloway's constant presence in the house. "I should send word to your cousin in Silverton," Nate said. "She must be worried about you." "Yes, please," Nora agreed, accepting the cup of tea he offered. "Though I'm afraid I'll be imposing on your hospitality much longer than either of us anticipated." "It's no imposition," he said firmly. "The ranch has never had such pleasant company." A blush colored her cheeks. "You're too kind, Mr. Foster." "Nate," he corrected her. "If you're staying 6 weeks, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Nate," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made his heart beat faster. Over the following days, as Nora regained her strength, a routine developed. Mrs. Holloway would help her dress and settle her in the parlor each morning, where she could look out over the ranch. Nate would join her for lunch, telling her stories of ranch life and listening to her tales of teaching in St. Paul. A week after the accident, Nora's cousin Martha arrived for a visit, bringing clothes and personal items. The reunion was tearful and joyous. "You've been so fortunate, Nora," Martha said, glancing appreciatively at Nate. "Mr. Foster is known as one of the most respected ranchers in the territory." "I've been blessed by his kindness," Nora agreed, her eyes meeting Nate's across the room. Martha stayed only a few hours, explaining that her small home in Silverton couldn't accommodate someone with Nora's current needs. "You'll stay with Mr. Foster until you're healed," she insisted. "Then we'll sort out your future." As May turned to June, Nora became a fixture at the ranch. The hands tipped their hats to her each morning, and even the cook made special dishes to tempt her appetite. Mrs. Holloway, initially stern about maintaining proprieties, softened toward the arrangement, especially when she discovered Nora's skill with a needle. The two women spent afternoons mending and sewing, their laughter drifting through the house. For Nate, Nora's presence transformed the ranch from a place of work to a home. He found himself hurrying through his duties to spend time with her, bringing her wildflowers he spotted on the range or books from his limited library. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nora broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "My leg is healing well," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of her splint. "Dr. Maxwell says I might be able to put weight on it in another week or two." Nate felt a pang at the implication. "That's good news," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Yes," she agreed softly, "though I find myself less eager to leave than I should be." The admission hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Nate turned to look at her, finding her gaze already on him. "I don't want you to go," he said simply, the words escaping before he could consider them. Nora's breath caught. "That's not proper, Nate." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Their conversation was interrupted by a ranch hand riding in with urgent news about a broken fence line, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day by the train wreck. The following weeks brought new challenges. June rains swelled the creek that ran through the ranch, threatening the lower pastures. Nate worked tirelessly alongside his men to protect the cattle, often returning to the house muddy and exhausted. Nora, now able to move about with the aid of crutches Mrs. Holloway's husband had fashioned, took it upon herself to have hot meals waiting regardless of the hour. The first time Nate came in to find her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she stirred a pot of stew, he stopped short in the doorway. "You shouldn't be doing this," he protested. "Your leg is healing nicely," she finished for him. "And I'm not an invalid, Nate. I want to contribute something in return for your hospitality." He didn't argue further, secretly pleased to see her claiming a place in his home. That night, they ate together in the kitchen, talking long after the food was gone. Nate told her of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, breeding better stock, perhaps adding sheep. "You've built something remarkable here," Nora said, admiration clear in her voice. "It's lonely work sometimes," he admitted. "Does it have to be?" she asked quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Nate felt as if he were standing on the edge of a cliff. One step could send him falling into unknown territory. Before he could respond, Mrs. Holloway bustled in, breaking the moment. "Miss Zimmerman, you should be resting that leg, not sitting up all hours." The opportunity passed, but the question lingered between them in the days that followed. As June gave way to July, the weather turned hot and dry. Nora's leg improved enough that she could walk short distances without crutches, though she still tired easily. One morning, she announced her intention to visit her cousin in Silverton. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough," she said as they shared breakfast. "Martha has found me a room in town, and the school board is willing to interview me for the teaching position." Nate felt his stomach twist. "You're not fully recovered. I'm well enough to begin building my own life," she countered gently. "I can't stay here forever, Nate." "Why not?" The words escaped before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Nora stared at him, her cup halfway to her lips. "Pardon." Nate set his fork down, suddenly certain of what he wanted. "Why can't you stay, not as my guest, but as—" "As what?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "As my wife," he finished, the words releasing something that had been building inside him for weeks. "I know it's sudden and perhaps foolish, but these past weeks— I've never known a woman like you, Nora. I've never felt this way before." Color flooded her cheeks. "Nate, you can't possibly—" "I can," he interrupted, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know my mind, Nora, and my heart. I was alone before you came into my life, and the thought of returning to that solitude is unbearable." Tears welled in her eyes. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you laugh at my terrible jokes and don't mind when I come in smelling like the stables. I know you're smarter than me by a country mile. I know I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Nora withdrew her hand, rising shakily to her feet. "I need time to think," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't a decision to make lightly." Nate nodded, fighting disappointment. "Take all the time you need." She limped from the room, leaving him with cold coffee and a heart full of uncertainty. For 3 days, they moved around each other carefully, polite but distant. Nate threw himself into ranch work, returning late and leaving early. Nora spent hours writing in a journal Mrs. Holloway had given her, her expression thoughtful. On the 4th day, Nate returned from checking the herd to find Nora waiting for him on the porch. She wore a simple blue dress that Martha had brought her, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Can we talk?" she asked as he dismounted. Nate nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. He joined her on the porch, maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she began, her hands folded in her lap, "and about my life before the train accident. I came west seeking a fresh start, a purpose beyond the classroom in St. Paul. And have you found it?" He asked quietly. "I believe I have," she replied, meeting his gaze directly, "but not in the way I expected." Hope flickered in Nate's chest. "What are you saying, Nora?" "I'm saying that life can change in an instant. One moment I was a passenger on a train, and the next I was in your arms, being carried away from danger." She took a deep breath. "I don't believe that was mere chance, Nate. I believe there was a reason you found me in that wreckage." "Are you saying yes?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Nathaniel Foster," she answered, her voice steady despite the tears shining in her eyes. "And if you're certain about this, then yes, I will marry you." Joy surged through him as he closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Silverton. Martha stood as Nora's witness, beaming with approval at the match. Mrs. Holloway had worked tirelessly to transform Nora's blue dress into something suitable for a bride, adding lace from her own wedding gown at the collar and cuffs. As they spoke their vows before the preacher and a small gathering of townspeople and ranch hands, Nate could hardly believe how his life had changed in the span of 2 months. The woman he'd pulled from the smoking ruins of a train wreck now stood beside him as his bride, her eyes full of love and promise. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with dancing in the town square and a feast prepared by the ladies of Silverton. As the sun began to set, Nate found Nora sitting apart from the crowd, watching the festivities with a contented smile. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Foster?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Not one," she replied, leaning into him as he put his arm around her shoulders. "I was just thinking about how strangely life unfolds, if that train hadn't derailed." "I believe we would have found each other somehow," Nate said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be." They returned to the ranch that night as husband and wife, the house transformed from a bachelor's practical dwelling to a home. Mrs. Holloway had moved her things to the bunkhouse for a week, giving them privacy to begin their married life. Standing in the doorway of what was now their bedroom, Nora turned to Nate with a mixture of shyness and determination. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "For what?" he asked, puzzled. "For saving my life, for taking care of me, for loving me." Nate drew her into his arms, overwhelmed by the knowledge that this remarkable woman was now his wife. "You saved me too, Nora. I just didn't know I needed saving until you came along." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Foster ranch flourished. Nora took the teaching position in Silverton, riding in 3 days a week once her leg had fully healed. The other days, she worked alongside Nate, learning the business of ranching with the same intelligence and determination she brought to everything. By the following spring, news spread through the territory that Mrs. Foster was expecting. Nate walked around in a daze of happiness, checking on Nora constantly until she laughingly banished him from the house when Mrs. Holloway was visiting. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I'm perfectly fine." Their daughter, Margaret, was born on a clear September night in 1879, almost exactly 16 months after the train wreck that had brought her parents together. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and from the moment Nate held her, he was completely besotted. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling the tiny bundle. "She is," Nora agreed tiredly from the bed, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. "Our miracle." As the years passed, the Foster family grew. A son, James, joined them 2 years after Margaret, and another daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after that. The ranch expanded too, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Nora continued to teach, eventually opening a small school on the ranch itself for their children and those of neighboring ranchers. Her classroom, a converted barn, became known throughout the region for its excellent standards and innovative methods. On warm summer evenings, the family often gathered on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. Nate would look at his wife and children and marvel at how complete his life had become. One such evening, as the children played in the yard and Nora sat beside him, her hand in his, she asked, "Do you ever think about that day, the train wreck?" "Often," he admitted. "It was the luckiest day of my life finding you in that smoke." "It's strange to think that something so terrible could lead to something so wonderful," she mused, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Nate squeezed her hand, remembering the frightened, injured woman he'd carried from the wreckage. "Out of the smoke and into my life," he said softly, "and I've been grateful every day since." As darkness fell over the Montana landscape, the Foster family retreated indoors, their laughter and love a beacon in the vast wilderness. From tragedy had come joy, from chance had come destiny, and from the ruins of a derailed train had emerged a family bound by love and resilience, thriving in the heart of the American West.